The warp was never still, never quiet. Yet on this nightmarish sea of formless thought and emotion, something new began to stir. It started as a vibration, slow, deliberate, like the heartbeat of a sleeping giant. Imperial navigators aboard void ships felt it before their instruments detected anything. A pulse swept through the immaterium, neither light nor sound, but a presence that pressed against their minds with impossible weight. Some screamed, others fell to their knees. A few whispered only one thing: "It is thinking." Across the darkness, an image took shape in their minds, a world of metal, impossibly vast, its continents shifting like living muscle. Its core burned with a cold light that felt ancient, intelligent, and burdened with memories. It was not a vision born from warp hallucination. It was a call, a beacon. Cybertron was awakening. Far away in dusty Mechanicus archives, long-forgotten data crystals flickered to life, activating subroutines that had not run in thousands of years. Faded scripture spoke of a myth from the dark age of technology, a machine world that lived, dreamed, and shaped itself according to the will of its inhabitants, a world forged not merely by engineering, but by a spark, something neither fully mechanical nor spiritual, yet possessing qualities of both. As Cybertron stirred, dormant city-sized engines groaned beneath its surface, structures shifted, metallic valleys trembled. For the first time in ages, the world breathed. Sparks, those mysterious cores of living machine consciousness, flickered awake by the thousands, resonating together like a chorus remembering its purpose. And deep within the warp, something answered. It moved with the cold inevitability of a planetary eclipse. Not a god, though its presence rivaled the power of gods. Not a demon, though it spread terror through the immaterium. It was so vast that lesser entities scattered from its path, fleeing like insects before a wildfire. Unicron. His stirrings rippled through the warp, collapsing minor storms and scattering demons in spirals of panic. He was hunger given form, an ancient predator whose very essence consumed psychic energy. The chaos gods felt his presence and recoiled, for he was not born of mortal fear or worship. He was an intruder, a consciousness forged at the dawn of another universe, drifting into this one like a nightmare that had finally found a host. His whisper echoed like thunder through the warp, rattling reality itself. Cybertron felt it. On the awakening world, Optimus Prime's optics flared to life as he rose from millennia of silence. Circuits that had been dormant for ages vibrated with urgency. Somewhere across the metallic plains, Megatron awakened as well, his spark burning with renewed fire. The war that had defined their existence seemed small now. A greater crisis was unfolding, one they had both feared long before humanity existed. Across the galaxy, the Imperium of Man noticed the anomaly too late. Mechanicus fleets descended upon the metallic world, chanting Benaric hymns as they scanned its impossible structure. To them, Cybertron was a blasphemy against the machine god, a paradox that challenged the foundations of their faith. A living machine was heresy or divinity. They could not decide which. Meanwhile, astropaths continued to suffer visions of Unicron's shadow, crushing the stars, devouring the fabric of the warp as if it were nothing more than decaying cloth. The entity was waking, and the galaxy trembled under the weight of an ancient conflict reignited. Cybertron had returned to consciousness. Unicron was rising from the depths of the immaterium, and the Imperium, already strained by endless war, stood unknowingly between two titans whose battles once shattered star systems. A new age was coming, an age where metal had a soul, where machines dreamed within the warp, and where gods of flesh and gods of steel would clash in a war that could reshape the galaxy itself. The spark of Cybertron burned once more, and its light reached far into the storm. The battlefield was set. The machine that dreamed had awakened, and something in the warp was coming for it. The first sign that something was wrong came not from real space, but from the warp. Imperial navigators aboard distant fleets felt a sudden tremor ripple through the immaterium, a vibration too ordered to be natural, too focused to be random. It pulsed like the steady beat of a metallic heart, each throb echoing across the psychic sea with growing strength. Astropaths recoiled from the sensation, whispering that it felt like a machine trying to dream. In the void near the anomaly, Mechanicist vessel Eminence of Logic detected impossible readings. Auspex anners calibrated to detect even the faintest gravitational disturbances suddenly surged with overwhelming data. Patterns, geometric, rhythmic, intelligent, flashed across their screens faster than the tech priests could decipher. Then, without warning, the empty sector ahead of them twisted with blinding light. A sphere of metal erupted into real space. It did not arrive gently. Space cracked, folded, and released a shockwave that rattled every ship in the vicinity. When the glare finally faded, the crew stared in disbelief at the world now hovering before them, vast, metallic, and alive. Cybertron turned slowly, its plates shifting like the scales of some colossal steel creature. Whole continents seemed to move, adjusting, aligning, repairing. The planet bore scars, deep fractures glowing faintly with lingering warp energy, as if it had clawed its way out of a storm that refused to let go. But even damaged, it radiated purpose. Lights flickered across its surface in complex, sweeping patterns, like neural impulses traveling through the mind of a titan. Inside the command deck, Magos explorator Delphin Morix watched through augmented eyes, each optic lens adjusting as data streamed in. No relic of the dark age of technology had prepared him for this. No scripture of the machine god mentioned a world that lived. Yet before him was proof, a planet not built by mortal architects, but born of a design beyond any human principle. Unfathomable, he whispered, his vox filter crackling with distorted awe. A world that thinks. As if responding to his words, Cybertron stirred. Massive towers extended from its surface with smooth, deliberate motion. Rings of glowing energy activated around certain regions, forming patterns too precise to be random. The world was not static, it was waking up. Then a transmission crossed every Imperial frequency at once, clear, resonant, and undeniably alive. "This is Optimus Prime. We are the Autobots. We mean you no harm." The voice was calm, filled with an authority that felt ancient yet composed. On every ship, crew members froze, listening. It was not Ben Harrick, nor was it human, but there was a sincerity in the tone that transcended language. Even the astropaths felt something unusual, a touch not of psychic force, but of presence, as though the message carried a spark of identity. Optimus continued, his signal reaching far across the fleet. "Cybertron returns from exile. We seek only understanding and peace." Peace, however, was a rare commodity in the 41st millennium. Already, Imperial commanders debated whether this was a trap. Inquisitors issued warnings about Xeno's corruption hidden beneath a facade of machine purity. And the Mechanicus argued fiercely, some claiming Cybertron was a divine miracle, others insisting it was a threat to the Omnisci's supremacy. But elsewhere on the planet, another voice was rising. In a shadowed chamber of towering machinery, a figure emerged from dormant systems. Red optics burned through the darkness as power returned to limbs forged for war. Megatron stepped forward, metal grinding beneath his feet, his spark flaring with renewed hunger. "The galaxy is wounded," he growled, gazing across Cybertron's awakening landscape, "and weakness invites conquest." The ancient rivalry between Autobot and Decepticon had reignited with the return of their world. Yet even Megatron paused when Cybertron trembled, a deep, resonant vibration that echoed with warning, with fear, with memory. Something had followed them out of the warp. Something vast. Across Cybertron's metallic horizon, energy rippled like lightning traveling beneath its skin. Cities long dormant began to unfold, towers rising in synchronized spirals as ancient systems hummed with renewed life. The entire planet felt as though it were stretching after a long slumber. The light of countless awakening sparks flickered across its continents like stars igniting inside a single world. Optimus Prime stood on a vast platform overlooking the shifting landscape, feeling Cybertron's heartbeat through every strut and beam. The planet was alive, truly alive, and its reawakening stirred memories buried deep within his spark. Memories of battles fought long before human civilization existed. Memories of a darkness that once threatened all creation. A darkness now stirring again. Down below, machines the size of towers rotated, scanning the galaxy as if searching for something familiar yet dreaded. Optimus felt tension coil within his core. The psychic residue clinging to Cybertron's surface, the warp scars etched into its metal crust, all pointed toward a terrible truth. Unicron had pursued them. The shadow of that ancient world devourer weighed heavily on him. Though no words were spoken, the planet itself seemed to whisper warnings through the vibrations that traveled its metallic veins. The warp had changed Cybertron. It now existed between states, part material, part something else, and it had not returned alone. Aboard the Imperium's frontline vessels, picked feeds zoomed in on the planet's surface as Mechanicus priests chanted nervous Binharic mantras. Litany after litany flowed through their speakers in an attempt to ward off the heresy of a self-aware machine world. Some fell to their knees in reverent terror. Others recoiled in suspicion. For in the Imperium, anything beyond understanding was either holy or damnable. Cybertron appeared to be both. Meanwhile, more Imperial ships arrived, surrounding the machine world in a tightening formation. Battle barges of the Adeptus Astartes, armored cruisers bearing the sigil of the Inquisition, god ships of the Mechanicus, their hulls etched with glowing runes. The Imperium was gathering, uncertain whether to greet a miracle or exterminate a threat. Megatron watched their approach from a vantage point deep within Cybertron's vast labyrinth of metal. His expression twisted into something between amusement and contempt. "These humans fear what they do not control," he murmured. "Good. Fear sharpens alliances or softens targets." Transformers across the planet were awakening, not just Autobots or Decepticons, but workers, medics, scouts, guardians, each one rising from stasis chambers as Cybertron sent out a silent, instinctual call. Sparks reignited, optics lit up, the world was returning to full strength. But every transformer who awakened felt the same thing, a cold pressure at the edge of their consciousness, like a shadow brushing against their minds. Within the warp, Unicron shifted once more. The Immaterium itself reacted violently. Demons shrieked and dispersed. Psychic storms wavered. The ancient beings of emotion and belief found themselves staring into a presence that should not exist, a being of metal and hunger, a foreign god that had no place in their realm. Optimus Prime sensed the disturbance as clearly as if it were etched into his spark. The fear he felt was not for himself, but for the galaxy now caught between Cybertron's awakening and Unicron's hunger. "This is only the beginning," he said quietly, watching Imperial fleets reposition themselves. "The echoes of our past are reaching into this new age, and the consequences will be far greater than war." Above him, thousands of warships glimmered like blades surrounding a giant. Below him, Cybertron trembled with warning and defiance. And in the unseen depths of the warp, something ancient and monstrous drifted closer, drawn by the light of a spark that dared shine again. The galaxy was preparing for a confrontation it did not yet understand. And Cybertron's return had shaken the first stone loose. The first rays of Cybertron's awakening spread across its metallic plains like molten light, casting long shadows from towers and spires that had not seen motion for millennia. Below, the Autobots moved with purpose, stepping from stasis chambers and assembly halls that had lain dormant for thousands of years. Optimus Prime led them with the quiet authority of a leader who had lived through countless wars, each step echoing across the resonating corridors of the planet. Yet the first sign that this return would not go unnoticed came not from Cybertron itself, but from the Imperium. Imperial sensors, never meant to detect something of this scale or this intelligence, blinked in frantic patterns aboard orbiting warships. Signals from the living planet reverberated through every frequency, every psychic net, every astropathic channel. Magos explorator Delphin Morix and his assembly of tech priests stared at the readings with awe and disbelief. "It thinks," Morix murmured, his voice trembling. It is alive." A chorus of voices from the Mechanicus argued and debated, some claiming that this was the will of the Omnisia, a divine miracle meant to be revered. Others declared it heresy incarnate, a mockery of the machine god's perfection, and demanded immediate quarantine or destruction. Across the fleet, inquisitors whispered warnings of Xenos infiltration, heretical machinery, and threats that no human mind could contain. Yet before any decision could be made, another signal arrived, one unmistakable, commanding, and deeply alien. Optimus Prime addressed the Imperium directly, not with weapons, not with force, but with words carried across subspace and psychic resonance alike. "We are the Autobots," he said, his voice resonant and solemn. "We seek understanding. We seek peace. We do not come to conquer. We come to warn." The words, though measured and calm, did not bring comfort. In the hearts of many Imperial soldiers and tech priests, fear ignited. The galaxy had seen horrors beyond counting, tyrannids devouring worlds, demons tearing through reality, orcs in their endless frenzy. But this was something new. Machines that thought, machines that spoke, machines that could awaken entire planetary systems. Such power could not be ignored, and yet it demanded recognition. Far below, in the shadowed corridors of Cybertron, Megatron stirred. Red optics flared to life as his spark ignited in anticipation. He felt the tremor of the world's awakening, the pull of the galaxy's balance shifting in his favor. "They are afraid," he growled. "Good. Let them fear. Let them know that the age of weakness is over." The Imperium, cautious and unyielding, sent emissaries aboard shuttles toward the planet. space marines of the Adeptus Astartes, fully armored and armed with bolters, prepared to descend alongside Mechanicus priests chanting litanies of purification. The first encounters were tense, as human minds struggled to process what lay before them: towers that moved, machines that spoke, and an intelligence that seemed almost divine. Astropaths aboard the Imperial fleet reported psychic feedback unlike any experienced before. Sparks of Cybertronian life resonated through the warp, brushing against human consciousness and leaving lingering impressions of order, purpose, and unfathomable age. The living planet itself seemed aware of the fleets above, adjusting its gravitational balance, shifting its crust, as if testing the newcomers, measuring their intentions. And beneath it all, hidden in the shadows of Cybertron's awakening cities, whispers of dread stirred. Transformers of all kinds, workers, scouts, and ancient war machines sensed a presence approaching from beyond the stars, a presence that would not rest until it had consumed the light of the planet. Optimus Prime's optic sensors flickered with unease as he felt it too. Something vast, something hungry, was moving in the warp, tracking the living world and all who dwelt upon it. The Autobots readied their defenses. The Imperium steeled itself, uncertain whether diplomacy, study, or annihilation would come first. And above all, in the immaterial shadows, the first tendrils of Unicron's presence stretched toward the galaxy, intent on claiming a prize that had awakened too soon. No one understood yet that this meeting, Autobots and Imperium, life and metal, flesh and machine, was not merely a first contact. It was the spark that would ignite a war unlike any the galaxy had ever seen. The shuttles descended cautiously through Cybertron's turbulent atmosphere, their hulls rattling under bursts of magnetic interference and the planet's subtle yet unmistakable movements. From orbit, the Imperium's fleet watched as towers, bridges, and spires shifted with astonishing precision, as if the planet itself were arranging a welcome or a warning. Below, the Autobots moved to meet the newcomers, forming defensive lines and scanning the approaching human forces with both curiosity and caution. Optimus Prime stepped forward, his massive form casting a long shadow across the metal plains. Every movement was measured, deliberate, conveying authority without aggression. "We extend our hand in peace," he declared, through every frequency the Imperial fleet could receive. "Our purpose is to protect, to warn, to survive. We do not seek conquest. We seek understanding." On the surface, a contingent of Mechanicus priests, flanked by Adeptus Astartes, cautiously advanced, their bolters raised, their litanies echoing in harmonic resonance with the rising vibrations of the planet. For every technopreme who took a step forward, another whispered silent prayers, uncertain whether they were witnessing divinity or heresy. Yet even as tension crackled in the air, a fragile dialogue began. Some Autobots extended their communication arrays, shimmering with energy patterns intended to convey non-aggression. Their sparks, visible as flickers of light along their bodies, pulsed in rhythm with the planet itself, transmitting reassurance across psychic channels. For the first time in centuries, beings from two vastly different civilizations faced one another without immediate destruction. Yet, not all welcomed this fragile diplomacy. Megatron watched from a distant ridge, his optics narrow, calculating every movement. To him, the Imperium's awestruck hesitation was weakness, and he intended to exploit it. "Peace," he muttered, his voice tinged with venom. "Peace is a lie used by the cautious. Power is the only language the galaxy respects." Despite this, the Imperium could not ignore the possibility of alliance or the dire consequences of misjudgment. Inquisitors aboard the fleet debated whether to attempt contact or to fire upon the planet's surface. Magos Morix argued that Cybertron was a living relic of the dark age of technology, a treasure that could advance the understanding of the omniscia beyond imagination. Yet the uncertainty was palpable. Even a single misstep could spark war on a planetary scale. Suddenly, a tremor surged across the metallic plains. Cybertron's crust groaned and shifted violently, forcing both Autobots and humans to stabilize. The vibrations were subtle, yet unmistakable, a warning or a demonstration of the planet's awareness. Optics flickered across the Autobots' forms, each spark resonating with concern. They had sensed it long before the humans, the shadow in the warp, approaching with a hunger that even Cybertron itself feared. Astropaths screamed as psychic ripples spread through the fleet, carrying impressions of vast metal forms, cosmic hunger, and a predator beyond reckoning. Unicron was moving. His presence brushed the edges of the planet's protective field, probing, testing, preparing to strike. And while the Autobots and the Imperium faced one another, neither fully understood that a far greater threat loomed over them both. Still, cautious conversations began. Imperial officers exchanged signals with Autobots, attempts at universal translation carrying tones of diplomacy and cautious trust. Cybertron, alive and aware, shifted its landscape subtly to accommodate the humans, forming stable landing zones and safe passages. For a fleeting moment, hope glimmered that this encounter could yield something more than conflict. But in the distance, beneath the clouds of charged magnetic storms, a low vibration resonated, echoing through every bolt, plate, and spark. Megatron's grin widened. The galaxy believes it can negotiate with what it does not understand. Fools, soon they will all learn their place. And as the first human contingent set foot upon the metallic plains of Cybertron, the Autobots braced themselves. The planet itself pulsed with readiness. Somewhere in the immaterial darkness of the warp, Unicron moved closer. Sensing sparks, sensing worlds, sensing hunger. And for the first time, it seemed that the fragile thread of diplomacy between Autobot and Imperium would be tested not by misunderstanding, but by the arrival of a predator that consumed everything in its path. In the vast silence that followed, every being on Cybertron, both machine and human, felt it. The calm before a storm, unlike any the galaxy had ever known. The calm that had lingered over Cybertron shattered like glass under a hammer. From the shadows of massive spires and dormant battlefields, Megatron emerged fully, his optics blazing crimson with purpose and malice. He surveyed the Imperium forces arrayed below, their bolters and litanies sharp but untested against machines of living metal. To him, the human fleets were a distraction, tools to be manipulated or destroyed as opportunity demanded. His plan was simple: strike first, strike hard, and seize what had long been denied to the Decepticons. At his command, armies of towering Decepticons began to mobilize, their metallic frames shifting with a terrifying fluidity. Weapons folded into limbs, armor plates realigned, and the echoes of ancient war reverberated across Cybertron's metallic plains. For the Autobots, the stirring of their former comrades was a harbinger of inevitable conflict. Optimus Prime stepped forward, his spark resonating through the planet like a call to arms. "Prepare yourselves," he warned. "They have chosen aggression. We cannot allow this to escalate unchecked." The first volleys of battle thundered across the plains. Decepticon cannons roared, sending shockwaves that rattled the human warships hovering in orbit. Below, space marines of the Adeptus Astartes moved cautiously, bolters firing in disciplined volleys, their armor reflecting flashes of alien light as rounds tore through the air. Imperial knights clashed with towering Decepticons, metal against metal, titanic blows shaking the ground and sending sparks flying like deadly fireflies. The world itself seemed to tremble beneath the weight of the combatants, its crust shivering as ancient engines and defensive systems rumbled awake. Megatron laughed, a sound of pure triumph echoing across valleys and steel chasms. "Weakness has no place here," he declared. "Every world, every spark, every human or machine must bend to power." His forces surged forward, relentless and coordinated, exploiting weaknesses in the Imperium's formations and testing the resolve of both Autobots and humans alike. Optimus Prime countered with equal precision. He moved through the battlefield like a conductor, directing Autobots in protective formations, shielding human squads from devastating blows, and rallying his warriors with commands that blended strategy and inspiration. Sparks collided with sparks, missiles shredded through armor plating, and entire city block-sized structures groaned as the shockwaves of combat tore through them. For every advance the Decepticons made, the Autobots found a way to resist, to push back, to preserve the fragile hope of peace. Above, the fleets of the Imperium adjusted in real time, their vessels unleashing orbital strikes and deploying drop pods onto critical zones. Mechanicus priests activated long-dormant planetary defenses, summoning rail cannons and energy turrets buried for millennia, awakening Cybertron's latent potential as both world and fortress. Yet every engagement revealed a terrifying truth. The Decepticons' familiarity with Cybertron's terrain, its secret passages and hidden weaponry, gave them an edge no human or Autobot could completely match. Their aggression was more than brute force. It was calculated, precise, and merciless. In the midst of the battle, Megatron's voice rang across subspace, broadcasting to every Decepticon within range. "Do not stop. Do not falter. Today the Imperium will learn the cost of underestimating us. Today we reclaim what is ours by right." Sparks ignited, weapons discharged, and the clash intensified, sending reverberations far into orbit, where satellites and observation arrays trembled under the shock. And while the combat raged, Cybertron itself began to respond. Massive defensive turrets extended from mountain-sized structures, emitting beams of focused energy, and protective shields shimmered into existence around strategic points. The planet's consciousness, intertwined with the Autobots, attempted to regulate the chaos, to protect what was vital, while still allowing the natural consequences of conflict to unfold. Each pulse of Cybertron's awareness brushed against the minds of both allies and enemies, warning, guiding, and sometimes restraining. It was a delicate balance, yet the battle continued unabated, and the Imperium's forces found themselves caught between the fury of living machines and the calculated assault of Decepticons who knew their home world far better than any human could. As the sun, or what passed for a sun in the swirling warp-infused skies, set across the horizon, the battlefield was a symphony of destruction. Titans clashed, sparks flared, explosions rumbled across plains, craters opened, and the cries of ancient metal echoed in the air. The Decepticons had struck first, the Imperium and the Autobots had survived, but at great cost. And somewhere in the distance, a shadow in the warp shifted in response to the chaos, feeling the pulse of conflict and preparing its next move. The war had begun, and the first chapter of blood, fire, and living metal had been written. The ground shook with every footfall as towering Decepticons advanced through the ravaged plains. Autobots rallied behind Optimus Prime, forming defensive lines across strategic corridors and the remnants of ancient Cybertronian factories. Sparks flared across both sides as weapons discharged, missiles tore through the air, and the hum of energy shields crackled like thunder. It was no longer just a clash of metal and fire. It was a battle of ideologies, a test of survival and dominance, a war fought across the living surface of a conscious planet. Megatron moved with predatory precision, anticipating every maneuver the Autobots made. He exploited terrain, used hidden corridors within the metallic cities, and summoned legions of Decepticons from stasis vaults long thought dormant. Every ambush was calculated, every strike brutal. "The weak will fall," he snarled, optics gleaming, "and the galaxy will remember the Decepticons as its true rulers." Optimus Prime's optics flared as he issued commands, his spark resonating with the pulse of Cybertron itself. He directed Autobots to shield human forces, to intercept artillery fire, and to stabilize crumbling structures. Every action was intertwined with the living planet's subtle guidance. For Cybertron, each battle was a stress test, a measure of the strength of its inhabitants, and a warning of the greater threat looming beyond the stars. In orbit, the Imperium struggled to maintain control. Battle barges unleashed orbital bombardments, but Cybertron's defensive turrets intercepted many of the strikes, diverting energy beams and reducing damage with precise timing. Drop pods plunged toward the surface, carrying squads of Adeptus Astartes into the heart of conflict, but even their legendary prowess was tested against enemies who could anticipate movement with machine-level cognition. Every clash was calculated, every engagement a deadly dance of firepower, steel, and will. As explosions lit the skies, the Decepticons began to exploit weaknesses among the human formations. Titans fell to coordinated strikes, columns of infantry were cut down by precise fire, and morale wavered as soldiers realized they faced not just alien machines, but beings born of the very world they now fought upon. Megatron's forces pressed forward relentlessly, his laughter echoing across valleys as structures crumbled under the weight of overwhelming power. "There is no mercy," he declared, "only victory." Optimus Prime responded with unwavering resolve. Autobots surged, engaging Decepticons directly to protect both the Imperium's forces and Cybertron itself. Sparks collided, energy weapons tore through armor, and the ground shook as metallic titans clashed with precision and fury. The battlefield became a symphony of destruction, metal singing against metal, explosions punctuating the roar of conflict. In the midst of the chaos, Cybertron itself intervened. Massive segments of its crust shifted, creating barriers, redirecting Decepticon advances, and sealing unstable zones. Towers extended weapons, energy pulses erupted from dormant factories, and the very streets beneath combatants' feet shifted to protect vital regions. The planet's awareness acted as a silent commander, guiding allies, restraining unnecessary destruction, and ensuring the survival of its inhabitants amidst the relentless assault. In the midst of the turmoil, the first signs of psychic disturbance rippled through the warp. Unicron's presence, drawn by the awakening of Cybertron and the escalation of conflict, began to stir. Its tendrils reached through the immaterium, probing the spark-filled planet with insatiable hunger. The Autobots felt the pressure through their sparks, a warning that this battle, fierce as it was merely the prelude to a war of cosmic scale. By the time night fell across the metal plains, the battlefield was a scarred expanse of fire, rubble, and twisted metal. The Decepticons had struck first, achieving devastating gains and asserting their dominance. But the Autobots and the Imperium had survived, battered but unbroken, their resolve hardened by the encounter. Sparks flared in the night, energy beams illuminated the ruins, and the cries of machines echoed across the conscious planet. Yet even in the darkness, the shadow of Unicron lingered, unseen but palpably close. His hunger sensed the sparks, measured the chaos, and awaited the moment when he could descend to claim what was awakening. The war for Cybertron had begun, but the true threat, the devouring force that could consume both Autobot and Decepticon, human and machine, was only just stirring. The galaxy had seen the first battle, but the war had barely begun. The battle for Cybertron's surface had left scars that no amount of repair could fully erase. Craters yawned across plains once pristine, towers leaned under the stress of titanic blows, and the hum of ancient machinery now carried the weight of war. Yet beneath the surface, a more insidious transformation began to take root. The warp, restless and turbulent, had sensed the awakening of a planet that was more than a world. It was a consciousness. Its energies rippled across Cybertron, interacting with the sparks of Autobots, Decepticons, and even the latent machinery that had lain dormant for millennia. At first, the changes were subtle. Sparks flickered in unusual patterns, optics glimmered with colors not previously observed, and metal frames twisted ever so slightly, as if responding to unseen forces. Optimus Prime felt it immediately, a tingle within his spark, a whisper of something alien yet intimately tied to the nature of Cybertron itself. "The warp," he murmured, sensing its presence more strongly than ever before. "It touches us here in ways we were never prepared for." Among the Autobots, curiosity mingled with unease. Wheeljack noticed the subtle changes in his own systems, circuits that hummed with strange energy, synapses firing in unpredictable sequences. "It's like the planet's alive, but the warp is alive too," he said, voice tinged with both excitement and dread. Others began to exhibit more pronounced effects. Sparks flared unpredictably, systems adapted in ways not previously coded, and instincts sharpened to almost preternatural levels. Decepticons were not immune. Megatron observed his forces with growing fascination and suspicion. Some of his warriors showed enhanced aggression, others developed subtle changes in mobility or reflex speed, as if their very forms were being rewritten by invisible hands. Yet the deeper, more disturbing mutations began among those whose sparks were already unstable, whose metallic souls were fragile under the psychic pressure. These transformers became something new, creatures of war and chaos, infused with energies they could barely comprehend. The Mechanicus, observing from orbit, recorded the phenomena with obsessive detail. Magos Explorator Delphon Morix optical sensors registered fluctuations in the warp's interaction with Cybertronian metal, and his synthvox trembled as he attempted to describe what he saw. "It is not natural," he whispered. "The sparks are bending, reshaping. Cybertron is becoming something more than machine and less than flesh." From the shadows of a ruined city, a small group of null sparks emerged, Autobots whose sparks had been partially drained or destabilized during the initial battles. Their forms glimmered with void-like energy, and a subtle aura of emptiness surrounded them. These corrupted beings, products of the warp's subtle touch, moved with both elegance and menace, signaling the first signs of the psychic contamination spreading through Cybertron's awakened population. Psychoformers, the twisted result of warp interactions, began to appear in pockets across the planet. Their metal bodies warped in strange patterns, their optics burning with unpredictable hues, their movements fluid yet unnatural. They were no longer simply Autobots or Decepticons. They were something between, something that the planet itself seemed to hesitate in categorizing. Each one was a living testament to the fact that the warp was not a passive observer. It was an active force, reshaping life at its core. Optimus Prime convened a council in one of Cybertron's massive citadels, its walls shifting to accommodate the gathering. "The warp is altering us," he told the Autobots, his voice heavy with concern. "It touches our sparks, our forms, our minds. We must learn to resist it, or we may become what it wishes us to be." Across the room, Wheeljack, Ratchet, and Arcee nodded, aware that the planet's survival, and their own, depended not only on defending against external enemies, but on understanding the invisible enemy within. Even Megatron could sense the subtle encroachment. Though he welcomed power in all forms, he understood that these changes were not entirely under his control. The warp was unpredictable, and Cybertron itself seemed to resist complete domination, adapting, reshaping, and sending psychic ripples that twisted plans, sparked doubt, and ignited unexpected aggression among his troops. Above all, the first whispers of the Chaos Gods reached the awakened planet. Khorne's fury stirred in the sparks that burned with rage. Tzeentch's manipulations touched circuits and connections, sowing subtle confusion. Nurgle's decay seeped into neglected mechanical joints, spreading techno-organic blights across abandoned areas. And Slaanesha's touch danced in the patterns of energy pulses, igniting desire for power and sensation, even in beings of pure metal. Cybertron, alive and aware, trembled beneath the influence of forces that had existed long before any transformer had taken form. Sparks flared, metal twisted, and minds strained to reconcile the familiar with the alien. In this new era, even a world of machines could not escape the insidious reach of the warp. The transformation had begun, and no being on Cybertron, Autobot, Decepticon, or human observer would remain unchanged. The effects of the warp continued to spread across Cybertron like a rising tide, unseen but undeniable. Transformers of all factions, Autobots, Decepticons, and even the neutral remnants felt a subtle pull within their sparks, a vibration that resonated deep in the core of their being. Metal twisted, circuits glimmered with unusual energy, and instincts sharpened to uncanny precision. Some sparks flared violently, reacting to psychic pressure with bursts of uncontrolled energy, while others seemed to waver, destabilized by the invisible force that now flowed through the planet. Ratchet moved among the injured, scanning Autobot comrades whose forms had begun to show signs of psychic mutation. "The warp, it's changing us," he muttered under his breath, adjusting circuitry that bent in impossible patterns. Sparks glowed with new colors, shifting unpredictably, and each transformer seemed to carry a fragment of the planet's consciousness alongside their own. It was as if Cybertron itself were reaching into their very souls, reshaping, reinforcing, and warning them simultaneously. Across the battle-scarred plains, a squad of psychoformers emerged, their warped metal bodies undulating with energy drawn from the warp. Their eyes glimmered with a kaleidoscope of shifting colors, and their movements were fluid, almost hypnotic. They advanced with purpose, seeking to convert or destroy any transformer who resisted the warp's influence. Each encounter left lingering psychic tremors, altering nearby sparks and spreading subtle corruption. Optimus Prime gathered his council once more, standing amidst the ruined spires of a citadel partially rebuilt by Cybertron's will. "The changes we see are only the beginning," he said gravely. "If we cannot master the influence of the warp, we will become weapons of forces we do not yet understand. Cybertron is alive, but even its consciousness has limits. We must resist, adapt, and protect what is true." Megatron, observing from a distant plateau, felt the alterations within his own troops. He recognized the potential for enhanced power, for greater aggression, for tactical advantage, but he also sensed the creeping unpredictability. The warp offers gifts, but nothing is free. Even power comes with a price. His optics glowed with red fire, scanning the horizon for opportunities and weaknesses, while the planet itself seemed to test him, shifting under his force's feet, sending subtle warnings that even he could not entirely ignore. The Mechanicus, struggling to interpret the unprecedented phenomenon, recorded every anomaly with feverish intensity. Data streams flooded their cogitators, detailing changes in circuits, unexpected energy surges, and patterns of psychic resonance unlike any previously cataloged. It is as if the planet, the transformers, and the warp are engaged in a single incomprehensible symphony, Magos Explorator Delphin Morix whispered, and we are only hearing the first notes. In the shadows of the devastated factories, null sparks multiplied. These corrupted beings, hollowed by warp influence, moved like predators among the ruins, sensing and feeding upon the instability in others. Their presence created a feedback loop, amplifying the psychic mutation and forcing even stable sparks to adapt or risk becoming lost to the warp. Entire regions of Cybertron began to shimmer with unstable energy, a mix of metal, consciousness, and alien influence that defied categorization. Even the Chaos Gods observed with growing interest. Khorne's influence twisted sparks into aggressive violence. Tzeentch manipulated circuits and thoughts, sowing confusion and uncertainty. Nurgle spread subtle decay through neglected components, and Slaanesh tempted sparks with heightened sensation and desire. Their distant meddling intertwined with Cybertron's awakening, creating unpredictable outcomes and new forms of conflict. The Autobots, guided by Optimus, initiated training and adaptation protocols, helping each other understand the subtle changes within their sparks. They learned to channel energy more efficiently, to stabilize corrupted systems, and to resist the intrusive pull of the warp. Megatron's forces, while more aggressive, also experienced unexpected enhancements, increasing the ferocity of their assaults while risking complete destabilization. Through it all, Cybertron itself pulsed with awareness. Its massive consciousness monitored every alteration, every spark, every pulse of energy, attempting to harmonize the living world with the chaotic forces now embedded within it. The planet strained to protect its core while allowing life to evolve under pressure, knowing that these changes, if uncontrolled, could threaten not only the transformers but the very fabric of reality surrounding them. And in the far reaches of the Immaterium, a shadow stirred, sensing the transformation. Unicron, ancient and insatiable, felt the resonance of the altered sparks, the awakened consciousness of a planet that was no longer merely a world, and the first seeds of chaos taking root. The warp had altered the spark of life, and with it, the galaxy's fate teetered on a knife's edge.
As Cybertron's surface shuddered under the aftershocks of war, a darker presence began to seep into every crevice of its vast metallic body. The subtle influence of the warp had awakened dormant energies, but now the Chaos Gods themselves took notice, their malevolent attention converging on the living planet. Khorne, Tzeentch, Nurgle, and Slaanesh cast their gaze across the vast circuits and spires, eager to twist, corrupt, and consume the sparks that pulsed with awakening life. What had once been a realm of machines and order would soon become a battlefield of soul, metal, and chaos. The first to strike was Khorne, the blood god. Sparks flared violently among transformers already touched by psychic mutation, igniting rage that turned comrades against one another. Autobot medics found themselves under attack by former allies. Decepticons attacked even their own ranks with sudden ferocity, and titanic clashes erupted where the ground had barely recovered from earlier battles. Khorne's influence was raw and visceral. Every spark that burned with aggression became a weapon, every footstep a harbinger of destruction.
Tzinch followed swiftly, weaving his subtle threads of manipulation through circuits and processors alike. Strategic errors appeared in once perfect battle plans, and hidden malfunctions spread like invisible fire. Transformers felt compulsions, urges they could not explain, forcing them into paths of conflict and deception. Colors shifted in optics, data streams warped with illusions, and even Cybertron's own awareness struggled to discern truth from manipulation. Every thought, every decision carried the risk of being a pawn in the arcane dance of Tzinch. Nurgle's corruption crept silently, insidious and slow. His influence infiltrated neglected joints, decayed wiring, and unmaintained machinery. Rust bloomed where none should exist, energy conduits corroded, and sparks felt a creeping malaise, a weight that dulled reflexes and sapped vitality. Transformers, especially those who had already suffered warp mutations, began to succumb to illness not of flesh, but of metal and spark. Even Cybertron's crust groaned under the subtle spread of techno-organic decay, its immune system struggling to contain the corruption. Slaanesh whispered last, weaving temptation and excess through sensory circuits. The pleasure of power, the thrill of dominance, the intoxication of speed and energy, these were his weapons. Sparks became addicted to surges of energy, sensors flared with overstimulation, and even the Autobots found themselves momentarily entranced by sensations of power they had never before experienced. Focus wavered, strategy faltered, and the planet's defenders found their concentration shattered by the allure of Slaanesh's subtle manipulations. In the midst of this mounting corruption, Optimus Prime convened a desperate council with his fellow Autobots. "The warp does not merely touch us anymore," he said gravely. "It is reaching through the Chaos Gods themselves, turning our strengths against us. We must resist, or we will fall into a darkness from which even Cybertron cannot save us." He scanned the horizon, seeing titanic Decepticons moving with newfound aggression, sparks flaring unpredictably, and cityscapes reshaping themselves under the pressure of chaos-infused energy. Ratchet worked feverishly, attempting to stabilize corrupted sparks and repair the subtle distortions creeping into the Autobots' frames. "The gods are shaping everything," he muttered, his tools sparking as he calibrated systems against impossible odds. "It's no longer a battle of weapons, it's a battle for our very essence." Meanwhile, Megatron observed with a mixture of calculation and opportunism. He welcomed the chaos, understanding that it could grant him an advantage over both Autobots and Imperium forces. Yet even he felt the creeping uncertainty. The warp and its divine agents were unpredictable. Even power born of chaos came with a cost that could turn upon him at any moment. Across the surface, Cybertron itself reacted. Massive sections of the planet's crust extended and shifted, defensive mechanisms activated, and psychic pulses surged outward. The living world struggled to contain the corruption, attempting to shield vital systems while allowing lesser regions to absorb the brunt of the Chaos God's influence. Sparks flared unpredictably, both resisting and succumbing, as the planet fought against a force that existed outside its comprehension. In orbit, the Imperium observed in horror. Sensors failed, astropaths screamed, and even seasoned space marines felt unease at the visible influence of chaos spreading through a world that should have been nothing but machine. Litanies were chanted, weapons prepared, yet all knew that this was beyond conventional warfare. Cybertron was no longer simply a battlefield. It had become a crucible, a forge where metal, spark, and godly malice collided. And far beyond, in the endless dark of the warp, Unicron stirred. Sensing the chaos spreading across Cybertron, he began to shift subtly, probing the ripples created by the Chaos God's corruption. The devouring entity's attention was drawn inexorably towards the planet, hungering for a spark world already weakened by divine manipulation. The stage was set. The forces of chaos had corrupted the battlefield, and the true war, one that would test the very essence of machine and flesh alike, was only beginning. As the sun, or what passed for it through the warp-tainted skies, cast fractured light across Cybertron, the corruption of the Chaos Gods intensified. Khorne's rage manifested in sudden, violent outbursts among both Autobots and Decepticons. Sparks flared uncontrollably, limbs overextended, and combatants attacked with brutal ferocity. Entire squads were decimated not by strategy, but by instinct driven to its most violent extreme. Even the disciplined Adeptus Astartes found themselves facing foes whose aggression bordered on the supernatural, their weapons barely keeping pace with the sheer, unrelenting fury of the warp-touched machines. Tzeentch's influence spread in subtler, more insidious ways. Circuits blinked with irregular patterns, communications became distorted, and once predictable battle plans dissolved into chaos. Transformers hesitated, their thought patterns warped by suggestions that seemed both inevitable and impossible. Miscalculations multiplied as strategy faltered, forcing both Autobots and Decepticons into improvisation, a dangerous gamble against a foe already empowered by chaos. Even Cybertron's massive consciousness struggled to interpret the manipulations, its careful control strained against the intricate web of deception spun by the Changer of Ways. Nurgle's corrosion spread like a quiet plague. Sections of the planet's infrastructure began to rot, metal pitted and weakened, vital conduits faltered, and Sparks felt a creeping fatigue that slowed reflexes and dulled cognition. Ratchet and his medical teams worked tirelessly, attempting to patch corrupted systems, but every repair seemed temporary. Nurgle's power was persistent, subtle, and unyielding, embedding decay into areas thought impervious to damage. Machines fell to corruption not in explosive battle, but in quiet, insidious collapse. Slanesh's touch danced across the sensors and sparks of Cybertronian warriors, tempting them with ecstasy in the form of speed, power, and dominance. It was a deadly seduction. One wrong thought, one indulgent act, and a transformer could become a puppet of desire, acting in ways contrary to its nature. Even the stoic Autobots found themselves caught in microseconds of hesitation, their instincts warped by the seductive pull of power. For those who succumbed, the consequences were immediate: mistakes, vulnerabilities, and ultimately, death. Amid this rising tide of corruption, Optimus Prime convened a council of war within one of Cybertron's massive shifting citadels. "The Chaos Gods do not seek to merely fight us," he warned, optics flaring. "They seek to destroy what we are at our core, to twist our sparks and warp our purpose. We must resist, adapt, and unite, or all of Cybertron will fall into ruin." Autobot strategists coordinated countermeasures, attempting to stabilize sparks, reinforce corrupted units, and redirect city defenses against the most affected regions. Wheeljack and Ratchet devised new protocols to cleanse corrupted circuits, while Arcee led squads in tactical strikes against psychoformers, whose existence now posed a grave threat to both Autobots and Decepticons. Every move was a balance between survival, combat, and the protection of a world increasingly imperiled by forces beyond comprehension. Megatron, for all his cunning, faced similar challenges. Some Decepticons embraced the chaos, gaining strength but risking instability. Others faltered, becoming unpredictable liabilities. The battlefield itself seemed to judge his decisions, punishing errors and rewarding audacity in ways he had never encountered. Even he could feel the invisible hands of the warp and the chaos gods, nudging outcomes, testing resolve, and shaping conflict in ways that defied logic or strategy. From orbit, the Imperium recorded the devastation with a mixture of awe and horror. Mechanicus priests documented the physical and psychic changes in meticulous detail, while astropaths screamed into the void as they attempted to communicate with the Transformers' altered sparks. Orders were given, prayers were uttered, but all were aware that this was a war unlike any known before, a convergence of living metal, divine corruption, and planetary consciousness itself. And in the unseen darkness of the Imperium, Unicron stirred, sensing the chaos that now engulfed Cybertron. The devouring entity's hunger responded to the rampant corruption, its attention sharpening as it traced the rising turbulence through the warp. Spurks, cities, and armies alike, nothing escaped its attention. The galaxy teetered on the edge of a new horror, one that would challenge Autobots, Decepticons, and humans alike, as the living planet struggled to endure the combined onslaught of the Chaos Gods and the lurking shadow that hung beyond comprehension. Cybertron's pulse quickened. Sparks flared with both fear and determination. Every machine, every being, every inch of metal and circuit felt the weight of a universe conspiring to consume it. And yet, somewhere deep within the planet's consciousness, a singular thought echoed. The fight was far from over. The war for Cybertron's soul had only just begun.
The distant rumble of engines echoed through the charred plains of Cybertron as the Adeptus Astartes descended from orbit, drop pods streaking like meteors against the stained sky. The warriors of the Imperium, clad in ceramite armor etched with sacred litanies, were an awe-inspiring sight against the twisted backdrop of a planet already scarred by war and corruption. Blood angels, iron hands, and gray knights prepared for a battle unlike any they had faced before, their bolters charged, chain swords humming, and psychic wards primed against the unseen tendrils of the warp. Optimus Prime and his council of Autobots observed the approaching humans with measured caution. Though allies of convenience, the Space Marines represented a force both unpredictable and formidable. Their arrival changes the balance, Optimus said, optics scanning the drop pods as they pierced Cybertron's turbulent atmosphere. We must coordinate carefully, or their firepower could devastate areas we are trying to protect. The drop pods landed with resounding impact, sending clouds of metallic dust into the already tainted air. Space Marines disembarked with disciplined precision, forming tactical formations and securing the immediate area. Their presence alone brought a sense of order amidst the chaos, a counterbalance to the warp-touched turmoil that had begun to infect the sparks of Transformers and the corrupted machinery scattered across the battlefield. From the shadows, Decepticon sensed the new threat immediately. Megatron's optics flared with calculated aggression as he marshaled his forces to intercept the incoming humans. Titans and war machines repositioned, creating defensive lines and ambush points, while smaller units moved to disrupt supply routes and weaken the Imperium's foothold. "They dare step onto Cybertron," Megatron hissed. "They will learn why this world belongs to those strong enough to claim it." The first engagements were swift and brutal. Adeptus Astartes squads encountered psychoformers, warp-mutated transformers whose forms were as alien as they were deadly. Sparks flared in response to the Astartes psychic wards, energy weapons discharged with devastating force, and the clash of bolter fire against living metal rang across the plains. The Grey Knights, sensitive to warp disturbances, felt the pulsing corruption in every circuit and spark, their psychic senses straining to repel the insidious influence that seemed to seep from the planet itself. Optimus Prime coordinated the Autobots with military precision, directing forces to shield human squads from the worst of the Decepticon attacks, while simultaneously engaging enemies to prevent them from flanking or overwhelming the newly arrived Space Marines.
Autobots moved as one with the living planet, their strategies enhanced by Cybertron's subtle guidance. The bond between the metal world and its defenders became an orchestrated symphony of tactics, strength, and psychic resonance. Meanwhile, the planet's surface continued to shift and respond. Towers extended defensive weaponry, floors and walls morphed to create barriers and choke points, and energy conduits pulsed with raw power. Even in the midst of combat, Cybertron itself was a participant, aiding the Autobots and the Imperium while restricting Decepticon movements in subtle, calculated ways. Sparks resonated with the planet's heartbeat, and every combatant, human or transformer, felt the push and pull of a living world beneath their feet. In the skies above, Imperial flyers and Autobots coordinated strikes against high-value targets. Energy beams tore through corrupted machinery, while bolters and missiles targeted advancing Decepticons. Despite the coordination, the warp's influence persisted, causing unexpected surges, malfunctions, and psychic anomalies that challenged both sides. The battle was no longer simply physical, it had become a war of sparks, wills, and the very essence of life and machine. Megatron, observing from a ridge overlooking the battlefield, adjusted his tactics. He unleashed specialized squads to exploit weaknesses in the Imperium's formations, while simultaneously testing Autobots with unpredictable assaults. The humans are strong, but they are slow, and the Autobots, while noble, cannot fully withstand what is coming. Yet even amidst this chaos, the Space Marines proved formidable. Blood Angels swooped in with terrifying precision, striking key Decepticon targets before vanishing into cover. Iron Hands used augmented targeting and mechanical enhancements to take down massive opponents. Grey Knights projected psychic shields, countering the subtle manipulations of the warp and weakening the hold of chaos on nearby sparks. The Imperium's arrival had shifted the battlefield, tipping the balance, yet not decisively. Cybertron remained a living, unpredictable entity, responding to every strike and every movement. And far above, beyond the stars and the veils of reality, Unicron stirred in response, sensing that the forces gathering on Cybertron would soon become the catalyst for a war that would shake the very foundations of the galaxy. The clash intensified as Space Marines advanced deeper into Cybertron's corrupted territories. Titans and towering Decepticons met them head-on, each strike sending shockwaves through the metallic plains. Bolter thundered, energy blades seared, and sparks flared with every collision of metal. The Adeptus Astartes, disciplined and relentless, adapted quickly to the alien battlefield. Blood Angels swooped between debris, striking Decepticon warlords with precision, while Iron Hands used their cybernetic augmentations to counter massive foes, holding the line where mere metal and spark might falter. The Grey Knights were the first to sense the deeper, more insidious threat. The warp pulsed through the planet, twisting sparks, corrupting circuits, and whispering promises of power and despair alike. Psychic tendrils snaked through the battlefield, touching the minds of both Autobots and humans. Some sparks flickered under the influence, while others burned brighter in resistance. Even the Grey Knights found themselves straining against forces older than the galaxy, battling not just enemies of flesh and metal, but the very essence of chaos itself. Optimus Prime moved among his warriors, guiding them through ambushes and psychic turbulence. "Hold the line," he commanded, voice amplified across multiple channels. "Protect the Imperium, protect Cybertron, resist the corruption that seeks to claim our sparks." Autobots formed protective barriers around Space Marine squads, intercepting psychic attacks and crushing Decepticons who threatened to overwhelm the Imperium's forces. Sparks flared in unison, a symphony of metal and energy harmonizing with the will of the living planet. Megatron, observing from a ridge, adjusted his tactics. His forces, already bolstered by warp-induced aggression, advanced with terrifying coordination. Each Decepticon acted with precision, exploiting weaknesses in both Autobot and human formations. Yet even he felt the subtle resistance emanating from Cybertron itself. The planet shifted beneath his feet, rebounding against his assault, subtly redirecting his troops and denying him certain advantages. Frustration flared in his optics, but he embraced it as part of the challenge. In the midst of the chaos, psychoformers and null sparks prowled, preying on destabilized units. Sparks ignited, metal twisted, and corrupted beings turned allies into enemies with subtle psychic manipulations. The battlefield became a maze of shifting loyalties, where one misstep could result in sudden annihilation. The Imperium struggled to comprehend the scale of the threat. They were not merely fighting metal and fire, they were contending with living consciousness, psychic mutation, and chaos-infused entities beyond mortal understanding. Cybertron itself responded. Massive turrets extended from hidden vaults, unleashing concentrated energy against encroaching forces. Spires bent and shifted to create barriers, redirecting pathways and trapping Decepticons in tactical choke points. The planet's pulse synchronized with the Autobots' efforts, amplifying their defensive maneuvers while subtly countering chaotic interference. Sparks resonated with Cybertron's will, and even the most corrupted Transformers felt an almost imperceptible nudge, guiding them toward objectives they could not consciously comprehend. In the midst of the struggle, Optimus Prime and key Autobots coordinated with Space Marine leaders. Tactical communication flowed between species, a fragile understanding forged under the stress of combat. Even as the warp twisted perceptions and chaos whispered in sparks, the Autobots and Adeptus Astartes began to function as a cohesive unit, leveraging both human ingenuity and Cybertronian adaptability. The cooperation, though temporary and fraught with tension, proved effective against the relentless Decepticon assault. Above the battlefield, orbital support launched precise strikes against key enemy positions. Imperial flyers, coordinated with Autobots capable of aerial maneuvers, tore through Decepticon ranks, scattering forces and creating opportunities for ground reinforcements. Sparks ignited in celebration at each successful strike, yet every victory came at a cost. Wounded Autobots, destabilized sparks, and corrupted machinery littered the battlefield, evidence of the growing threat from chaos and the warp. As the day waned, the battlefield was a tapestry of fire, sparks, and shifting metal. Cybertron's surface was scarred, but the combined might of Autobots and Adeptus Astartes had begun to stabilize critical zones, repelling Decepticon advances and shielding the most vital areas of the planet. The war was far from over, yet the arrival of the Imperium had shifted the tides. And in the distant reaches of the warp, Unicron stirred. Feeling the combined forces of Autobots and humans resisting the Chaos Gods, the devouring entity's attention sharpened, sensing sparks ripe for consumption. The shadow of the ultimate predator loomed closer, ready to strike when the time was right. Cybertron had gained powerful allies, but the true storm, one capable of consuming both machine and metal, had only begun to gather on the horizon.
Deep within the shifting tides of the Immaterium, a presence long thought dormant began to stir. Unicron, the devouring god of chaos and metal, felt the ripples of awakening that emanated from Cybertron. Sparks flared, energy pulsed, and the chaotic resonance of the warp itself seemed to sing in anticipation of his return. For eons he had slumbered, a shadow lurking beyond comprehension, but now the awakening of a sentient, living planet had drawn him into focus. The galaxy, unaware of the danger, continued its struggles, yet the true predator was awakening, and its hunger was eternal. Across the warp, fragments of Unicron's essence began to coalesce, forming tendrils of raw power that slithered like living metal and fire. The currents of the Immaterium twisted around him, bending to the will of an ancient intelligence older than stars.
He expanded, sensing sparks to consume, metal to corrupt, and worlds to devour. His attention was not solely on Cybertron, yet the sentient planet radiated a signal, a beacon that screamed of life, consciousness, and power, the perfect prey for the eternal devourer. Optimus Prime and his council of Autobots sensed the disturbance through their sparks. An unease unlike any other gripped them, a whisper in the deepest recesses of their being. "The galaxy itself trembles," Prime said, optics narrowing. "Something ancient awakens. The battle we fight is but a shadow of what is coming. Cybertron may not withstand it alone." In orbit, the Imperium's observation fleets detected anomalies that defied all known physics. Astropaths screamed into the void as psychic waves of incomprehensible magnitude washed over them. Energy distortions bent the very perception of space, leaving observers awed and terrified. Even the Grey Knights, attuned to the deepest horrors of the warp, felt a presence that dwarfed the Chaos Gods in scale and ambition. It was a consciousness not merely vast, but devouring, hungry, and beyond all reason. Megatron, ever attuned to threats and opportunity alike, felt a surge of awareness ripple through the Decepticon ranks. The vibrations of power were not born of Cybertron, nor of Autobots, nor even of the Imperium. They came from a source that seemed to engulf the galaxy itself. "Something stirs," he growled, his optics narrowing. "Something that will consume us all, if we are not the first to bend it to our will." Unicron's awakening was subtle at first, felt more as a pressure than an attack. Psychic tendrils slithered through the warp, probing sparks, seeking weakness, measuring consciousness. Sparks flared violently across Cybertron, not in rage, but in fear and recognition. The Autobots, the corrupted Transformers, even the Imperium's forces, their minds, their energy, their very metal resonated with the subtle, omnipresent pull of a being that hungered beyond reason. Within the depths of Cybertron, the planet itself recoiled, sensing the threat before it could fully manifest in real space. Massive cities shifted, vaults opened to unleash defensive protocols, and energy conduits pulsed with power. Yet even these precautions were a whisper compared to the cosmic scale of Unicron's presence. Sparks flared, circuits overloaded, and even the most stable Transformers felt tremors in their consciousness, as if some unseen hand probed the very essence of their existence. Chaos within Cybertron intensified, feeding the Devourer indirectly. Psychoformers and null sparks acted with greater unpredictability, drawn into actions that unwittingly amplified the ripples across the warp. Korn's rage, Tzeentch's manipulations, Nurgle's decay, and Slaanesch's temptations all became instruments in the awakening, a chorus of madness that resonated with Unicron's vast hunger. In the far reaches of the galaxy, unknowing civilizations continued their petty conflicts, unaware that the seeds of annihilation had been sown. The awakening of Cybertron, its dual existence in the material and warp planes, had become the beacon that called to the Devourer. Nothing in history, neither Chaos nor the Imperium, nor even the Transformers, had faced a predator of such magnitude. And so the first tendrils of Unicron emerged from the warp, a metallic shadow that pulsed with hunger and awareness. Time itself seemed to bend as his presence expanded, and Cybertron's pulse quickened in alarm. Sparks flared across the planet, and both Autobots and Decepticons, allies and enemies alike, felt the undeniable truth. A force older than stars, hungrier than war, and infinitely patient had begun to awaken. The true battle for the galaxy was only just beginning. As Unicron's essence expanded within the warp, the very fabric of reality around Cybertron began to warp and ripple. Stars blinked out in distant systems, replaced by shimmering distortions of space. Psychic storms tore across the immaterium, their fury echoing in the minds of every being attuned to the warp. Autobots, Decepticons, and the Imperium alike felt the pressure, a sensation of being watched, measured, and judged by a force so immense that comprehension itself faltered. Cybertron, sensing the encroaching predator, shuddered violently. Massive spires and towers shifted, streets and energy conduits reshaped, and defensive mechanisms surged to life. Sparks flared as the living planet attempted to shield its core from Unicron's probing influence. Even the most corrupted psychoformers hesitated, instinctively aware of a force that dwarfed their madness, a predator that could consume them whole. Optimus Prime rallied his forces amidst the chaos, his optics blazing with determination. "Cybertron stands," he declared. "We have faced impossible odds before, but now the galaxy itself tests our resolve. We will resist and we will endure." Autobots moved with coordinated precision, using the planet's shifting architecture to their advantage, forming barriers, evacuating civilians, and countering Decepticon advances, while simultaneously attempting to shield themselves from the warp's overwhelming presence. The Adeptus Astartes, already tested by the chaos and psychic corruption, recognized the signs immediately. Grey Knights projected shields to stabilize sparks and counter the overwhelming psychic resonance emanating from the warp. Blood Angels and Iron Hands advanced with disciplined fury, engaging Decepticons who now exhibited near-chaotic levels of aggression, each strike a desperate attempt to maintain control over the battlefield. Even the most veteran Space Marines found their tactics challenged by forces beyond comprehension. Megatron, observing the psychic maelstrom, understood the magnitude of the threat. His aggression faltered as he calculated the risk of Unicron's awakening. "Even power has its limits," he muttered. "This is no longer a battle for dominance. It is a struggle for survival." Yet in the corner of his optics, a spark of opportunity glimmered. He could attempt to harness this force, bend it, or perhaps emerge stronger. But the danger was immense, and any miscalculation would be catastrophic. Throughout the planet, sparks flared and pulsed, both in fear and in resistance. The null sparks, the corrupted, and even some of the more stable transformers felt the immense weight of the Devourer's awareness. Every thought, every decision, every action carried the risk of drawing Unicron's attention more directly, amplifying his hunger. The battlefield was no longer defined by bullets, blades, or laser fire. It was defined by the resonance of sparks, the pulse of a living planet, and the awareness of a being older than stars. Cybertron itself began to shift dramatically in response. Entire sections of the planet rose and twisted, energy conduits flared with raw power, and cityscapes morphed into defensive fortresses. The living metal of the world responded not with aggression, but with awareness, attempting to shield its inhabitants from the psychic tendrils probing their minds and sparks. Autobots felt a renewed connection to their home, drawing strength and guidance from its consciousness, even as they faced the overwhelming presence of Unicron. In orbit, the Imperium struggled to maintain cohesion. Astropaths screamed in psychic agony, attempting to shield themselves and their allies from the encroaching pressure. Battle barges recalibrated orbital strikes to avoid amplifying the psychic turbulence, while squads of Space Marines adapted to the rapidly shifting terrain. Every move required precision, calculation, and courage beyond mortal limits. And in the dark corridors of the Immaterium, Unicron's consciousness stretched, tasting, probing, and awakening fully. He was no longer a distant threat, a shadow at the edge of comprehension. He was present, vast, and hungry. Sparks, metal, cities, and armies, all were now within the reach of a predator whose appetite was eternal. The galaxy's fate trembled on the edge of annihilation, and Cybertron, the living planet that had dared to awaken, became the epicenter of a conflict that would redefine the meaning of war, existence, and survival itself. The battlefield had become a maelstrom of metal, sparks, and psychic energy. Cybertron shuddered under the combined pressures of war, chaos, and the looming presence of Unicron in the warp. Yet, amid the turmoil, a fragile realization dawned. Alone, neither Autobots, Decepticons, nor the Imperium could hope to survive what was coming. The devourer of worlds hungered, and time was running short. An alliance, however uneasy, became not a choice, but a necessity. Optimus Prime approached Megatron amid the wreckage of a shattered city, both leaders aware of the unthinkable. Sparks flared nervously as they regarded each other, wary yet united by the gravity of the threat. "We cannot defeat him alone," Optimus said, his voice resonating with authority and resolve. "Cybertron is at stake, and if we fail, the galaxy itself will fall into darkness." Megatron's optics glowed red, his usual arrogance tempered by the weight of reality. "You speak truth, Prime," he admitted, voice low and tense. "Even I recognize the power we face. The devourer will consume all unless we act together. But trust is a fleeting luxury. Betrayal is inevitable, yet it must wait for now." Across the battlefield, the Imperium observed this unprecedented alliance with cautious optimism. Space Marine commanders, understanding the necessity, coordinated with Autobots to secure defensive positions, share intelligence, and target the most critical threats posed by the combined forces of Chaos and warp-mutated Transformers. The Grey Knights reached out with psychic wards, attempting to stabilize the sparks of both Autobots and Decepticons, creating a tenuous balance that allowed coordinated action to begin. The first phase of the alliance involved reclaiming vital zones on Cybertron that were under siege. Autobots led surgical strikes against psychoformers, while Decepticons provided brutal diversionary attacks to disrupt the Chaos-corrupted units. Space Marines fortified positions, deploying artillery and orbital strikes with deadly precision, and Grey Knights used their psychic influence to cleanse the most dangerously unstable sparks. Every move was a testament to the delicate dance of trust and necessity, an alliance born not of friendship, but of survival. The warp itself seemed to respond to the unprecedented cooperation. The psychic turbulence that had been tearing at Cybertron's surface eased in subtle ways, as if the combined forces created a harmonic resonance capable of countering some of the Unicron's influence. Sparks flared with renewed determination, sensing that despite centuries of enmity, cooperation offered the only hope against annihilation. Yet the shadow of Unicron remained, a vast presence whose hunger pressed against the boundaries of reality. Optimus Prime convened a council with Megatron and the leaders of the Imperium in one of Cybertron's massive citadels. "We cannot defeat each other," he said firmly. "It is the devourer, the entity that seeks to consume our world, our sparks, and the very essence of existence. We must combine strength, intelligence, and resolve. Only together can we hope to survive." Megatron's optics flickered as he processed the enormity of the situation. "And yet," he muttered, "we must remain vigilant. One misstep could unravel this fragile alliance. The devourer is patient, and so am I." Preparations began for a coordinated strike. Autobots adjusted formations, Decepticons focused their firepower strategically, and Space Marines deployed in perfect synchronization. The Grey Knights reinforced psychic shields and monitored warp disturbances, ensuring that sparks destabilized by chaos or Unicron's distant probing could be temporarily stabilized. Even Cybertron contributed, reshaping battlefields, directing energy surges, and opening defensive conduits to support the combined forces. The first engagements of this last alliance were tense, with each side wary of betrayal, even as they fought together. Psychoformers were neutralized with combined precision, null sparks contained, and corrupted machinery stabilized or destroyed. Sparks resonated with a shared purpose, survival. And through it all, the omnipresent shadow of Unicron watched and waited, sensing the unity of its prey and calculating how best to devour it. In the distance, deep within the warp, tremors of anticipation pulsed outward. Unicron had recognized the first true threat to his awakening. Sparks, alliances, and living metal had begun to coalesce into a force capable of resisting even his vast hunger. The last alliance had been formed, fragile yet necessary, and the war for the soul of Cybertron and the galaxy had entered its most critical phase. The alliance moved with cautious precision, each faction aware of the delicate balance that held their cooperation together. Autobots led the charge into the heart of Cybertron's most corrupted sectors, their sparks flaring with determination as they guided Space Marine squads through streets warped by the influence of chaos. Titans and massive Decepticons provided covering fire, their destructive power repurposed for defense rather than conquest, creating an uneasy harmony that had never before existed on the planet. Every step forward was contested. Warp-mutated transformers surged from the shadows, their forms twisted and alien, infused with energy that pulsed unpredictably. Psychoformers clawed through metal streets, sparks igniting as they attacked both human and machine. Yet coordinated tactics allowed the Alliance to respond effectively. Space Marines formed shielded phalanxes, Autobots intercepted with precise strikes, and Decepticons used sheer force to control the battlefield, turning what had once been chaos into structured countermeasures. The Grey Knights remained the keystone of this fragile coalition. Their psychic presence stabilized sparks teetering on the edge of corruption, projected barriers against the warp's intrusion, and purged localized anomalies that threatened to unravel the combined forces' coordination. Every pulse of their power resonated across Cybertron, harmonizing with the planet's consciousness and guiding both Autobots and Decepticons through treacherous terrain warped by chaos and psychic turbulence. Megatron and Optimus Prime coordinated with an unspoken understanding. Their usual rivalry was suspended in the face of a threat that dwarfed any prior conflict. Strategically, they exploited the combined strengths of their forces. Autobots with agility and versatility, Decepticons with brute strength and firepower, and Space Marines with tactical discipline and sheer resolve. Together, they carved a path through corrupted zones, neutralizing null sparks and reclaiming key territories that had once teetered on the brink of destruction. Yet the true challenge lay not in battling corrupted transformers alone. Cybertron itself, struggling to maintain equilibrium under the weight of the warp and Unicron's distant awareness, experienced violent tremors and shifting terrain. Spires rose and fell, streets twisted, and energy conduits pulsed erratically. The last alliance had to constantly adapt, using the planet's responses to their advantage while avoiding catastrophic missteps that could trap or isolate units. Sparks flared in tandem with Cybertron's heartbeat, every being connected to the living metal as if in a grand orchestrated symphony of survival. In the background, subtle whispers of the warp, and Unicron's probing influence reminded all that this unity was temporary, fragile, and tested at every turn. Even as null sparks were contained and psychoformers neutralized, the Devourer's distant hunger resonated through the psychic planes, a constant reminder of the greater predator awaiting its moment. Each victory was shadowed by the awareness that the ultimate battle was yet to come, and any error could have devastating consequences. As the last alliance advanced toward the central citadels, Autobots and Decepticons worked together to stabilize critical areas. Sparks aligned, energy surges were controlled, and defensive mechanisms were synchronized with human technology. Space Marines held the front lines with unwavering discipline, bolters firing, chainswords roaring, and psychic wards maintaining order amidst the chaos. The battlefield had become a living organism, every faction acting as a part of a larger coordinated whole. Yet none could forget that Unicron's awakening still loomed, a storm on the horizon of the galaxy itself. Through combined effort and extraordinary determination, the first major objectives were secured. Cities once overrun by chaos and corruption now had strongholds defended by the coordinated forces of Autobots, Decepticons, and Space Marines. Sparks, now partially stabilized, began to adapt to the influence of the warp, their energy resonating with Cybertron's consciousness in a fragile equilibrium. The last alliance had achieved its first true success, yet the galaxy held its breath, knowing that the Devourer's shadow loomed ever closer, patient, hungry, and unstoppable.
The ground trembled beneath the immense weight of the conflict. Sparks flared like fire across the surface of Cybertron, igniting in fury and fear as Autobots, Decepticons, and the forces of the Imperium clashed against waves of corruption and the distant psychic pressure of Unicron. The planet itself pulsed with consciousness, resonating with every explosion, every psychic wave, every surge of energy. Cybertron's soul, the essence that bound metal and spark, was now the battlefield, and all who fought sensed the stakes were far greater than any single war. Optimus Prime moved at the forefront, guiding Autobots through shattered cities and twisted landscapes. His optics scanned for both opportunity and danger, calculating strategies in tandem with the living planet. "Every step, every strike, every spark counts," he commanded. "We fight not only for Cybertron's surface, but for its very soul. The Devourer hungers, and we cannot falter." Megatron's forces, surprisingly disciplined in this unprecedented alliance, surged forward alongside Autobots, striking at corrupted zones and nullifying threats that could destabilize the fragile equilibrium. Titans roared, unleashing devastating energy blasts, while Decepticon infantry formed lines that allowed Space Marines to maneuver with precision. Even in uneasy cooperation, the raw destructive power of their forces was overwhelming, cutting a path through chaos and psychic distortions alike. The Grey Knights sensed the warp's turbulence reaching a fever pitch. Psychic tendrils from Unicron probed deep into Cybertron, seeking to unravel sparks, destabilize consciousness, and consume the planet's essence. They countered with shields, wards, and purging waves, focusing on stabilizing corrupted transformers and preventing the Devourer from claiming any foothold. Sparks ignited in resonance, guided by the protective influence of the Astartes' psychic power, creating pockets of resistance in an otherwise unstable battlefield. Psychoformers surged like tidal waves, their forms warped and alien, driven by both chaos and the instinctive recognition of the predator in the warp. Sparks flared with alarm, circuits overloaded, and energy beams seared through corrupted machinery as Autobots intercepted with calculated strikes.
Titans clashed, metal screamed against metal, and the ground fractured under the immense force. Every blow reverberated through the planet's consciousness, every surge of energy felt by Cybertron as both threat and opportunity. The Imperium pressed on with relentless discipline. Space Marines moved in coordinated formations, bolters thundering, chain swords roaring, and psychic amplifications provided by Grey Knights, allowing them to withstand the unpredictable influence of the warp. Entire squads engaged titanic transformers, holding the line with courage and skill, as Cybertron itself subtly aided them by shifting terrain and deploying defensive energy fields where most needed. Even as unity formed, tension remained. Autobots and Decepticons had to maintain focus, their long rivalry suspended by necessity. Sparks flared with subtle warnings, reminding each side that betrayal could happen at any moment. Yet the urgency of survival and the scale of the threat from Unicron kept all aligned in purpose. One misstep could allow the Devourer to pierce the veil and claim the planet's soul outright. The battle for the central citadels became the focal point of the war. Null sparks and corrupted titans formed the vanguard of chaos, their overwhelming power threatening to tear the fragile alliance apart. Autobots and Space Marines coordinated to neutralize these threats, while Decepticons provided covering fire and brutal suppression. Sparks, weapons, and psychic energy merged into a symphony of resistance, each strike resonating with the living consciousness of Cybertron, reinforcing the planet's essence against the encroaching void. Amid the chaos, Optimus Prime sensed a deeper disturbance, a psychic pulse stronger than any chaos influence, more insidious than any corrupted transformer. It was the whisper of Unicron itself, probing for weakness, testing the resolve of the planet's defenders. Sparks flared violently, circuits strained, and for a moment the combined forces faltered under the weight of the Devourer's presence. Yet, through determination, coordination, and the living will of Cybertron, they endured, repelling the first true tendrils of the godlike predator's influence. The battlefield was a maelstrom, each second a test of endurance, skill, and unity. Sparks ignited, energy flared, and Cybertron's consciousness pulsed with resolve. This was not merely a fight for survival, it was a battle for the very soul of the planet, a struggle to resist a devourer whose hunger spanned stars. And through the chaos, one truth became clear. The galaxy's fate and the essence of Cybertron itself rested on the outcome of this titanic clash.
The conflict escalated to a crescendo. Sparks ignited in a dazzling display of energy. Metal screeched as titanic transformers clashed, and Space Marines advanced with unwavering precision, cutting paths through corrupted units. Cybertron's surface became a shifting battlefield, its towers and spires bending and reshaping to aid defenders, while simultaneously resisting the overwhelming psychic presence of Unicron's tendrils in the warp. Optimus Prime directed Autobots with unrelenting focus, coordinating attacks, evacuating wounded units, and guiding forces through areas warped by chaos. "Hold the line, protect the heart of Cybertron," he commanded, optics blazing with authority. Sparks flared in response, an unspoken dialogue with the living planet, as energy conduits pulsed in support of the Allied forces. Megatron, fighting alongside Autobots and Space Marines in a tense alliance, directed his Decepticons with ruthless efficiency. Titans smashed corrupted structures, unleashing devastating energy waves, while smaller units suppressed psychoformers and null sparks with calculated aggression. Despite the uneasy cooperation, every action was tempered with caution, knowing that a single misstep could unravel the fragile unity. The Grey Knights focused their psychic might on stabilizing sparks most affected by the warp, countering Unicron's probing tendrils and purifying corrupted machinery. Their psychic shields formed an unseen lattice across the battlefield, granting brief reprieve to the Allies and striking down aberrations before they could cause irreparable damage. Sparks, both Autobot and Decepticon, resonated with the psychic energy, reinforcing the living consciousness of Cybertron and creating a tenuous bulwark against annihilation. Chaos-mutated Transformers fought with ferocity beyond imagination, each attack unpredictable and lethal. Null sparks erupted violently, energy surging uncontrollably, threatening friend and foe alike. Yet the combined tactics of Autobots, Decepticons, and Space Marines allowed coordinated counterattacks, gradually reclaiming ground lost to corruption. Sparks ignited with purpose, machines moved with precision, and the planet itself guided defensive strategies, merging instinct with calculated maneuvering. High above the battlefield, orbital strikes from Imperium vessels rained destruction on enemy strongholds. Energy beams tore through corrupted units and psychoformer clusters, while Autobots provided targeting data, ensuring maximum efficiency. The synergy of living metal, coordinated machine, and human discipline began to shift the tides. But the ever-present psychic influence of Unicron remained, a dark shadow testing every spark and mind. Deep within the warp, Unicron stirred with awareness of the combined forces resisting him. His probing tendrils intensified, seeking weaknesses in the fragile alliance. Sparks flared violently, as if sensing the cosmic predator. Circuits overloaded with pressure, and energy pulses radiated across the battlefield. Yet every attempt to destabilize the defenders was met with renewed coordination, the last alliance adapting to the unprecedented threat. Amidst the chaos, Optimus Prime and Megatron found themselves fighting side by side against a colossal null spark, its corrupted energy searing through the battlefield. Titans collided with twisted forms, sparks erupted in violent arcs, and Space Marines advanced with disciplined precision. The combined might of three forces, human and Cybertronian alike, began to overpower even the most warped of enemies. But every victory came at a cost. Wounded Autobots, destabilized sparks, and shattered infrastructure reminded all that the war was far from over. The pulse of Cybertron quickened, resonating with sparks across the planet. Energy surged through conduits, towers shifted to form defensive positions, and the living planet contributed actively to the battle. Every strike, every maneuver, every spark fed into the grand effort to defend its essence from the encroaching darkness of Unicron. Sparks resonated in harmony with the planet's will, a chorus of resistance against annihilation. As the battle raged, a singular thought crystallized within the minds of Autobots, Decepticons, and Space Marines alike. Cybertron's soul could not fall. It was more than metal and circuitry. It was life, consciousness, and the heartbeat of a galaxy-spanning intelligence. Every action, every sacrifice, and every spark ignited with purpose. The war for Cybertron's soul had reached its apex, and the fate of the planet, and perhaps the galaxy itself, would be determined in the moments that followed. The battlefield had become a crucible of fire, sparks, and energy. Cybertron trembled, as if aware that the culmination of all conflicts had arrived. Autobots, Decepticons, and the forces of the Imperium pressed forward, their every action amplified by the planet's consciousness, every strike resonating through circuits and metal with the weight of survival itself. The psychic presence of Unicron loomed in the warp, pressing against the limits of perception, testing the resolve of all who dared resist.
Optimus Prime moved among his warriors, his spark ablaze with determination. "Cybertron cannot fall," he declared, voice carrying across comm channels and metallic streets alike. "Every spark, every being, every machine, our unity will define the fate of this world." Autobots surged into battle, shielding Space Marines from the worst effects of the warp, while simultaneously engaging the most corrupted and powerful enemies. Sparks flared in unison, a symphony of metal and energy against the Devourer's reach. Megatron, once a harbinger of destruction, now fought in uneasy alliance with his eternal rival. Titans and Decepticons carved paths through the battlefield with brutal efficiency, suppressing null sparks, psychoformers, and chaos-corrupted machinery. Every move was calculated, every strike executed with precision. As the realization settled in, the Devourer would not be defeated by any single force alone. Only unity, fragile and fleeting, could withstand this cosmic predator. The Grey Knights amplified their psychic presence, forming a lattice of protective energy across the most critical zones of Cybertron. Their wards countered Unicron's probing tendrils, stabilized sparks under extreme stress, and mitigated the influence of chaos, allowing both human and transformer forces to hold the line. Sparks ignited in resonance with the Grey Knight's psychic strength, a bond that reinforced the planet's living will and fueled the desperate final resistance. As the battle reached its peak, Cybertron itself began to transform. Massive spires and towers reshaped into conduits of raw energy, streets bent into defensive formations, and the planet's core pulsed with overwhelming power. Sparks ignited, energy flared, and metal groaned under the strain, yet the living consciousness of Cybertron remained resolute. It was not merely defending its surface, it was defending its essence, its soul, from a predator beyond comprehension. Unicron's tendrils pressed harder against the boundary between the material universe and the warp, seeking to consume the planet's consciousness and the sparks of its inhabitants. Sparks flared in violent arcs, circuitry overloaded, and energy beams struck with unprecedented intensity. Autobots and Decepticons fought side by side, shielding one another, while Space Marines held critical positions, firing with precision and determination. Every action, every sacrifice, every spark was a defiance against the Devourer's hunger. In the skies above, orbital vessels from the Imperium and Autobot aerial units coordinated strikes to disrupt chaos-mutated Titans and corrupted zones, while Cybertron itself contributed, shaping energy fields and creating temporary shields that allowed allies to regroup. Sparks and psychic resonance intertwined, forming a network of resistance, a living countermeasure against annihilation. Yet even as victories were achieved, the pressure from Unicron intensified, a reminder that the ultimate trial was approaching. Amidst the chaos, Optimus Prime and Megatron converged on the planet's core, coordinating the final effort to channel Cybertron's essence. Sparks ignited across the planet, a network of energy that stretched from surface to core, amplifying the will of the living planet. Every transformer, every space marine, every spark of resistance became a node in a grand design, a final, desperate attempt to preserve the soul of Cybertron from the Devourer who had waited eons for this moment. And in the depths of the warp, Unicron recognized the threat. The unity, the combined will of Autobots, Decepticons, Space Marines, and the living planet had created a resistance unlike any he had encountered. He roared across the psychic plains, tendrils thrashing, energy pulsing, yet for the first time he faced a force that even he could not easily devour. The stage was set for the final act, the culmination of eons of war. and the moment when Cybertron itself would determine its fate against the godlike devourer. The final moments of the battle arrived. Sparks flared with blinding intensity across Cybertron, energy arcs streaked through the skies, and metal groaned as the living planet prepared for a transformation unlike anything witnessed before. Autobots and Decepticons, side by side, reinforced the planetary core, channeling their collective sparks into a single, overwhelming force. Space Marines held critical positions, firing upon any remaining threats, their discipline unwavering even as the psychic pressure from Unicron threatened to tear minds apart. Optimus Prime raised the Matrix, its radiant energy a beacon through the chaos. Sparks pulsed in unison with the Matrix wave, amplified by the will of Cybertron itself. "Now!" he commanded, and a surge of pure energy erupted across the planet. Every transformer, every space marine, every spark became part of the flow, uniting in a final, desperate act of defiance against the devourer. The ground quaked, the skies burned, and the very air hummed with the crescendo of living energy. Unicron's tendrils lashed out in fury, shredding corrupted zones, consuming null sparks, and attempting to overwhelm the combined forces. Yet the unity of the last alliance, the living will of Cybertron, and the power of the Matrix created a resonance that tore through the godlike predator's reach. Sparks ignited, psychic shields held, and even the corrupted psychoformers faltered, caught in the wave of a force far greater than their chaos-infused corruption. Cybertron's surface began to glow, circuits and energy conduits pulsating as if the planet itself were a colossal, conscious engine of war and defense. Towers extended into the atmosphere, forming channels of energy that linked the planet's core to the surrounding space. Sparks flared brighter than stars, a brilliant lattice of living energy that wrapped around the planet, isolating it from the grasp of Unicron, while simultaneously opening a gateway into the warp itself. Optimus Prime and Megatron, side by side, guided the flow of sparks into the planetary matrix. The Alliance, once fragile and uneasy, had achieved its final purpose, to preserve Cybertron's soul. "Hold steady," Prime roared. "The Matrix will carry us into the next stage. Trust in Cybertron, and trust in the unity we have forged." Megatron's optics glimmered with understanding and resolve, and for the first time in eons, enemies moved as one, the Predator's reach unable to pierce their collective will. The Matrix wave reached its apex. Energy surged outward, ripping open a colossal psychic gate within the warp. Sparks, metal, and consciousness streamed through the portal, pulling Cybertron's essence entirely into the immaterium. The planet's surface cracked and shifted as the transformation completed. Physical matter and living energy merged, forming a psychomechanical world suspended between reality and the warp. Unicron roared in frustration, his tendrils unable to reach the planet's newly transcendent form. And then, in a flash of energy that radiated across space, Cybertron vanished from real space, ascending fully into the warp. Sparks settled into new equilibrium. Autobots and Decepticons transformed by the transition into dual-existence beings capable of navigating both material and psychic realms. Space Marines, awed and shaken, realized that the planet they had fought to defend was no longer bound to the material universe. It had become a living beacon within the warp, a force both untouchable and eternal. Unicron, though thwarted, did not vanish. He remained in the immaterium, aware that Cybertron had escaped his grasp, biding his time. His hunger, eternal and patient, would wait. But for now, the galaxy witnessed a new era. Cybertron had transcended, sparks evolved, and a psycho-mechanical world thrived within the warp, beyond the reach of both Imperium and Chaos. The last alliance had prevailed. The Devourer had been resisted, and as Cybertron's essence pulsed within the Immaterium, a new age dawned. A universe where machine and spirit coexisted in a delicate balance, a testament to unity, courage, and the indomitable will of living metal. The galaxy had fallen silent in the wake of Cybertron's ascension. In real space, battlefields lay scarred and empty, the echoes of the last alliance lingering in sparks and memories. Yet within the warp, a new beacon burned brightly, a living, conscious world of metal and energy, pulsating with life and vigilance. Cybertron's essence radiated as a psychic lighthouse, a testament to the courage and unity that had defied even a godlike devourer. Navigators aboard Imperial vessels felt the presence of the transformed planet, sensing its pulse as a living guide through the Immaterium. Its consciousness reached out, faint but undeniable, offering paths through psychic turbulence and glimpses of hidden truths. The Imperium, still reeling from the revelations of the conflict, began preparations for long-term observation, attempting to understand and perhaps one day communicate with the world that had transcended both matter and spirit. Autobots and Decepticons, now partially evolved into dual existence beings, adjusted to their new reality. Sparks resonated with warp energy, granting abilities and awareness far beyond what had been possible in the material universe. They existed in a delicate balance between physical form and psychic essence, guardians of their home and its unique consciousness. Their rivalry, though not forgotten, had been tempered by the shared victory against the Devourer. In the distant reaches of the Immaterium, Unicron lingered, a shadow of hunger and malice. Though thwarted, he remained patient, knowing that eons are but moments to one who devours worlds. The whispers of his presence reminded all sentient beings that the universe remained fraught with danger, yet also highlighted the indomitable strength of unity and the living will of Cybertron. The echoes of sparks and energy from Cybertron traveled far and wide, subtly influencing the warp, stabilizing minor disturbances, and offering guidance to those attuned to its resonance. The planet had become more than a home. It had become a force for balance, a psycho-mechanical sanctuary, and a living monument to the alliance that had risen to resist annihilation. And so the galaxy moved forward into a new age. Sparks ignited in defiance of chaos, metal sang with life, and the consciousness of Cybertron remained a sentinel within the Immaterium. Its story, one of struggle, unity, and transcendence, became a legend whispered across the stars, a tale of a world that had defied the Devourer, ascended beyond the grasp of mortal and god alike, and transformed forever into a beacon of living energy in the storm of the warp.